Good evening, everyone. My name is Neil Savoy, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's diversity event, Dismantling the School-to-Prison Pipeline and the Rise of Hip-Hop and Transformative Justice in the Era of Ferguson by Dr. Anthony Nocella. The event is sponsored by the Undergraduate Student Association's Diversity Board, headed by Miss Asher Havis-Walton and myself. If you are interested in Diversity's events or our programming or anything else that we do on this campus, feel free to contact myself. Again, I'm Neil Savoy or Asher right here. Dr. Nocella is a senior fellow of the Dispute Resolution Institute at the Hamline Law School, is a professor of education and justice studies, and is nationally recognized as a leading scholar activist on the topic of the school-to-prison pipeline and academic repression. He is co-director of Save the Kids, a national grassroots, fully volunteer organization dedicated to alternatives to and the end of youth incarceration and the school-to-prison pipeline. His most recent book, From Education to Incarceration, Dismantling the School-to-Prison Pipeline, is being praised by national organizations such as the ACLU. He has organized nationally on the topic and has provided workshops for youth and adults in more than 30 different jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities. Tonight's presentation will speak about the growing surveilling, arresting, repressing, and incarcerating of youth by schools, corporations, and law enforcement agencies. This presentation, grounded in the movement that arose from Ferguson, examines how the school and criminal industrial complexes construct and depend upon the school-to-prison pipeline. Without further ado, join me in welcoming Dr. Nocella.
Thank you. I'm pretty hyper and I got a lot of energy, so I'll be walking back and forth a lot. And I'm also an organizer, so I'm going to ask you all to give me some feedback, raise your hand, ask questions, whatever. These are a few books that I did, focusing on rebel music. Anybody know the song Rebel Music? Who sang it? Who wrote it? Anybody? Okay, Bob Marley. So, Bob Marley. And so we brought hip hop and punk together, and it's specifically non-academic, and it's supposed to break down the whole lyrics and analysis of what these songs are all about. So people will say, like, well, I don't want to read the US history book, and I don't want to do Howard Zinn. He's, always just Howard Zinn. Well, there's a lot of songs in this book that have been analyzed, like 200, 2,000 words, really simple for high school or college students. So that's one of the books. And then, of course, Education for Action, which is a strategic book on how do you create change, like how do you make a header. So anybody know the size of a header for Facebook? Okay, so you all need to know these things if you want to start organizing. Really basic things. It's 800 by 51 by 315. Why do I know this? Because I've been saying it a million times to different organizers and making different headers. So those kind of things, how to use Twitter, how to use hashtags, how do you, organize in your community using WordPress. So those kind of tools we need to learn, right? Or we won't, utilize the skills that we have, and we'll just, grab a banner or a sign, whatever we see on CNN, CBS, or, Fox News, and then just mimic that, right? The point and the essence and the soul of activism is creativity. If you can't be creative, then throw punk and hip hop out the window, right? Punk and hip hop is the essence of punk and hip hop is creativity, right? Doing something with nothing. And that, that's how hip hop got going, right? And that's how punk got going. Right? So we're going to be talking a little bit about that, and then of course from education and incarceration. There's a guy in there, I was just talking to a friend of mine back there, about Mumia Abu-Jamal. Raise your hand if you know who Mumia Abu-Jamal is. Okay, great, I'm going to tell you. So now we know that we're learning things. Mumia Abu-Jamal is an amazing black journalist who is incarcerated. He was on death row, and he's a political prisoner, and he was by the age of 13. Anybody 13 in here? Anybody 14 in here? So already, when he was 13, he was the secretary of the Philadelphia Black Panther Party, right? And he had a nice little group called the FBI already investigating him, right? So that's how amazing this guy was, right? not as amazing possibly, but I don't want to like compare and contrast individuals, but like Fred Hampton, anybody know him? Okay, so you know him, okay. So you know all the dead people. Like you need to know all the living people so we can write them on a daily basis, right? So there's some living wonderful people, as wonderful as Fred Hampton. So Fred Hampton, he's 21 years old. Anybody around 20, 21? Okay, so this is a lot of people. But he would walk out on a stoop in Chicago, and 1,000 people would swarm and just listen to him, right? And he said this great quote, right? And this is the quote that got him murdered by the Chicago PD, right? He said, white power for white people, yellow power for yellow people, brown power for brown people, black power for black people, all power to the people. Because he knew that intersectionality was existing and that we needed to come together in one struggle for total liberation, right? To support each other for the Chicano power movement in Los Angeles, or, you know, the Black Power movement in, you know, Chicago, or the queer and LGBT and trans movement that was going on at the same time in New York City, you know, because the buildings were being burned down. So that he knew that we had to bring everybody together, right? So, you know, he got, you know, killed and assassinated, but his son is still around, which is beautiful. And he's doing great work, right? Then Malcolm X, he was like, yo, did you know, he came back from Africa and he said, did you know that there's amazing white Muslims and Latino Muslims? And he's like, that's what got him in trouble, right? And then Martin Luther King, he was like, we need to end the Vietnam War. We also need to support the unions, right? And it's not just, you know, issues of African Americans. He was breaking down, and all these individuals that were targeted knew something that you all now know because you know, read it in academic books and by Kim Crenshaw in 1989 called a concept called intersectionality. Anybody ever heard of intersectionality? All right, hopefully a lot of feminists do. The whole essence of like being not one individual, right? So my experience, who the heck is Anthony Nocella and why is he talking about these issues, right? So I grew up in Philly and I was really influenced firsthand about the MOVE bombing in 1985 that was going on. And I went to a really political church called First United Methodist Church of Germantown, called FUMCA. And I couldn't sit still. I was bouncing around. I couldn't speak that well. I learned how to read in 11th grade. I was in segregated schools and special ed from 1st to 12th grade. Learned how to read the is dog in 11th grade. Was not only like, my school was not just like volunteers in the Special Olympics, we were actually in the Special Olympics, right? So, you know, this is my story, right? I didn't want to live. I got scars on my, you know, both arms, left and right. But my father, you know, he said that, yo, you know, whatever, you know, this is a religious institution. My dad's Catholic. I'm Quaker. And I was thinking about becoming a priest, but, you know, a little bit of my anarchist tendencies came out. And, but I do love the Jesuits, and I was thinking about being a Jesuit out of all of them. I was like, yo, I like this, you know, liberation theology. Give it right back to them, you know. So, but you know, Quakerism and you know the Catholic community really, you know, I really saw a connection with. So I did a lot of work with the Catholic workers. Anybody know anything about the Catholic workers? All right, cool. They're a great group. They're like the anarchist Catholics, right? So they don't get paid for what they do. They protect people that are needing to be fed. They give shelter, clothes, etc. And they're in major cities. I'm sure there's one here in Buffalo, right? Anybody know? There is? There used to be, so we need one. We need to get some of this money here to go over there. Now I'm going to cause some conflicts. So the issue of building solidarity and alliance needs to occur. And so I got involved by seeing issues of MOVE and seeing issues of poverty, and then my family went down to Houston, Texas to live. And I was like, wham, right? And I saw, you know, the largest rodeo and barbecue, and I saw cowboy boots and cowboy hats, and I saw all these things that I never like knew anything about. And my dad was saying, yeah, people ride horses. I'm like, what are you talking about? People ride horses? No, they don't. And it was true. And then I heard racism in my classes, and I got in a fight about racism, and you know, some kid was getting picked on, and I got up and threw a chair. So yeah, because I didn't know how to express myself, not to justify violence, but you know, and this was a school of a lot of kids with disabilities, right? So, you know, then I looked at my own, you know, issues of disability and not being able to express myself or not having a voice on the table. So I saw how I was being pushed out or being stigmatized and put, you know, targeted by school and how school was a very, very violent situation and institution for me. It's not a beautiful liberatory experience where I'm learning. There's a difference between school and education. Education can happen on the corner with no money. School is the idea of breaking you down and making you into a machine to think in a certain way, where it perpetuates the kind of idea of standardized testing and you know, all these other kind of structures and grades and rubrics. Anybody ever heard of a rubric? Yeah, everybody knows a rubric. It's the idea of like not thinking, just do what the rubric says and I'll get an A, right? But we need to throw that rubric out the, you know, and put creativity in it, right? So let's kind of put down the school to prison pipeline, and then I'll get into like some, you know, basic issues and definitions and, you know, theories, and then like also get you up here at the very end to hold a banner to actually get you involved and guilt you into holding a banner, because you'll probably like sneak out the back door and be like, no, I got something to do. I can't hold a banner for 5 minutes, right? So the school to prison pipeline is a systematic process which pushes out certain youth from schools and into juvenile justice systems throughout discriminating policies. Does that make sense? If anybody wants this PowerPoint, I'll give it to you. I'll send it out in mass, whatever you want. My goal is to destroy the school to prison pipeline and all prisons, right? And you know, we'll get into what else I want to destroy later. So, but we'll take baby steps, right? So who's ever heard of a concept bullying? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of concept bullying. All right. You've heard of bullying over here? Okay. So bullying is a made-up term to re-victimize and stigmatize and put blame on youth and those that are, you know, marginalized and oppressed, right? It's really interesting that the same group of people that are bullied are the same group that is being pushed out of school and targeted, right? And that group of individuals are 4 individuals, and that group is youth of color, LGBTQIA youth, youth with disabilities, and youth that are economically disadvantaged, okay? So those are the 4 groups that are pushed out, and so we need to talk about oppression, not bullying, because these are the systems that are pushing these kids out and perpetuating bullying, right? If I tell you to stop saying the F word or the B word or the R word to somebody, that is not because somebody is a jerk. It's because they are perpetuating oppression. And a lot of the schools and the principals and the teachers and staff and adults and parents and the system, etc., are not being able to talk about oppression. They're talking about bullying because it's an individual basis. But if we talked about oppression, that would mean we have to change the curriculum, we would have to change the whole system, we would have to hire and fire new practices, we'd have to change everything, right? And they don't want to do that. So then they talk about bullying and how to be nice to people, how to say thank you, and how to say please. But we have to go deeper, right? So now this is a part that I'm going to get you all involved with, right? So A, youth of color, is A, B, C, or D? Help me out here. Come on, you brilliant educators. C? C. Okay, this is good. Perfect. All right. Now, B, LGBTQIA youth. Which one over here? A, B, or C, or D? We can't be C. D? Okay, no. Somebody said no. What is it? A? A, highest per capita of incarceration. So this presentation is going to be focusing a lot on these groups, okay? So I'm going to focus a lot on racism and Ferguson and hip hop, but I'm also going to be focusing at the very beginning on all of these groups. Does that make sense? So youth with disabilities, that's my group. Anybody got a disability in here? Raise your hand. Be proud. Nobody got ADHD, ADD? Dysphonic? All right, be proud of that. Because some of the most brilliant people that have ever changed anything in this world had disability, because we are the other, we're the scary one. We have superpowers you can't understand, right? Most brilliant individual on this planet right now, can't even walk, right? Can't even speak, quote, normally. He teaches at the best university in the world, Oxford University. His name, he talks about aliens. That's how, like, he talks about if God exists. He says he proved that God doesn't exist, right? And he talks about aliens. What's his name? Anybody? Stephen Hawking, right? He's got a disability. Einstein, for all those people that don't know, Einstein failed his math classes in high school, right? Because he did it differently. He did it backwards, right? I guess he would fail Common Core, right? So, So finally, youth that are economically disadvantaged is the largest cause of incarceration. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, the worst form of violence is poverty, right? So if we want to end mass incarceration, police brutality, police, the whole kit and caboodle war, we have to end poverty, right? And how it exists. Because it's the basis of exploitation of another, right? That's what poverty is all about, exploiting labor. And that's how we have, these prisons, and we have, child labor in other countries, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll be looking at that in a second. So what causes the students being pushed out of school? I made this chart, and it's back there, and I can give it to you. I made this for youth that were incarcerated. They were like, Anthony, you're talking over my head. You're talking about Foucault and Derrida and post-humanism and continental philosophy. I don't know what you're talking about, Anthony. Can you just break it down to us? So I was like, anybody ever gone to Chuck E. Cheese in here? Okay, perfect. This is, I call the whack-a-mole effect, okay? So a lot of people say, oh, black people, Latino people, people of color, Somalis, Hmong, all of you all are lazy. Who's ever heard that? Come on, let's be honest. We've heard a lot of racist comments, right? So this is kind of proving that people are not lazy, but there's a system in place to oppress groups of people. Even though when they put their head up, they're whacked down, okay? First, western part of Africa, lots of it, people were stolen from their land and pushed out of their land and then enslaved. We all know that, hopefully, right? That's the part that you learn in school, right? This is the other part you don't learn in school right here. Maybe the Jim Crow you'll learn a little bit about because of Martin Luther King Jr. and you'll skip everything else. So, 1400 to 1865, okay? 1865 was the end of what war?
Civil War.
Perfect, Civil War. Well, the North was saying, hey, we need to, be socially justice, and we need to be liberal, and we need to end racism. While at the same time, we need some cheap labor. So what they did was they created the 13th Amendment, and I'll talk about the 13th Amendment in a little bit. But the 13th Amendment actually institutionalized and legalized slavery. It didn't end it, right? So we have to really look at that. So then, who's ever heard of Angela Davis here? We're going to drop names, I'm going to give you information, you got to write this stuff down. Okay, so Angela Davis was a feminist and radical, and she's still around, and she talks about the prison industrial complex. And a lot of people, like her and Ruthie Gilmore and a lot of other people, say the prison industrial complex started in the 1990s with Victoria's Secret and Jansport and KFC and Verizon and Sprint making money off of labor that is in prisons from 20 cents to 35 cents an hour. No, it actually started with convict leasing in 1865, right? So we have to understand when the prison industrial complex and the exploitation of labor of prisoners began, right? So then we imprisoned these people, we enslaved these groups of people, and that wasn't enough. So we got a bunch of scientists in universities and colleges to say, now, because of someone's hair, or because of someone's nose, or because of someone's forehead, they're not as human as white people, and that was the rise of eugenics. It's a racist, ableist, sexist, anti-gay science that still a lot of people perpetuate and support, okay? Who's not heard of eugenics in here? Not. Okay, some people have heard of it? Okay, cool. All right, so then we say, now you're not even human, and that's where the idea, because look at 1950s, that was the idea of the 3/5 vote. We don't want to give them a full vote, but we do need the South to win some elections, so we're going to give them 3/5. And what we're going to call these individuals is minorities, right? Who's ever heard of minorities, right? Minorities, if you look it up in a dictionary, which now you'll probably Google, and so if you Google or Wikipedia, what's going to say really simply the definition is less than. So if you don't want to think of this group of people as less than, or write that these groups of people are less than, don't write minority. Write marginalized, oppressed groups, say something that's more, on point and realistic, right? So, Jim Crow began, we all know about this, equality, separate but equal, all of these kind of things were going on, Rosa Parks was going on. So then we kind of move on to the 1960s and the 1970s, okay? And this is Fred Hampton, who was shot sleeping in bed. If you see, let's pretend this black line right here is the bed, okay, where he's sleeping. The cops, the Chicago cops were outside the room with the door shut, and they came up the steps okay? It was like a row home, if you know row homes. So it was like walked up, and they just shot right at bed level, right? Like hundreds of times, right across bed level. And he got killed, sleeping, while his wife and the baby in her belly were alive and rolled over to the bed to protect herself, right? There was not one bullet going outward. He was shot, of course, and killed. And then the whole week or month, people from all over the world came and walked through the house and observed it and took pictures. And like there was a line going from like all the way around the block, right? Because they knew how significant a 21-year-old was. Before MySpace and Facebook and Twitter could get out 1,000 people by just walking out his room. No one can do that, right? Like, and I think that's how powerful. And he was a danger because he was telling the truth, right? So then, not the rapper, but we have Rick Ross. Who's ever heard of him? Highway Ricky Ross. Rick Ross got a whole bunch of drugs, and in 2014 a movie came out, which I hope that you all get to watch. It's called The Messenger, right? Killing the Messenger. And it's about his story. It's about how crack cocaine and illegal weapons, right, AK-47s, not US guns, not like M16s and R14s and things of that sort, but like Russian military weapons were first sent to Central America, then, you know, to aid and develop the war that was going on in Central America at the time, right, in the 1980s and the 1970s. So, but to fund that war, they needed money. So, you know, and they were bankrupt. You know, the US government was like, where do we get this money to keep this war going? Okay, so Oliver North and a number of other people said, why don't we sell crack cocaine? We'll create it, right? Not a black youth in Los Angeles or the Bay Area created crack cocaine. It was actually law enforcement. And so Ricky Ross was the biggest drug dealer in the whole country at the time, selling crack cocaine and giving out guns. So he first got people addicted, and then he started selling it to them. And that is how the war on drugs began. It's another story that you all probably didn't know, right? And so now he recently got out, and Gary Webb, who wrote a book about it, right, 6 months later after the book came out, committed suicide. And there was a book, Did He Commit Suicide, right? And he was a depressed person because the CIA and a number of other, you know, individuals and agencies were saying, no, he's crazy, he's, you know, all this ableist language, and he was depressed, and this is why he did this. And all of his facts and research was completely made up and not proven, right? Even though a number of politicians and senators and state representatives have come out and said, no, this is clearly the truth now. So, and there's enough information now that has just come out in the last few years by the CIA, even though it's like marked black, that does prove that drugs were pushed in by law enforcement into first the Los Angeles area and then the Bay Area into specifically the black community, right? So we got all these people on crack cocaine by law enforcement, by the US government, and then you got Nancy Reagan over here saying, why are you doing drugs? Why are you doing drugs? And then you got Ronald Reagan, you know, over here saying, if you do drugs, I'm going to arrest you, right? And those two made a really good, you know, team. And that was the beginning of the war on drugs, where one said, how dare you get on drugs? Who gave you those drugs? Not my friends over here. And then he said, if you are on drugs, I'm going to arrest you, and I'm going to arrest you for a long time. And New York created a law called the Rockefeller Laws. And now people are recently getting out of jail and prison because of the Rockefeller Laws for crack cocaine. And like a bag of crack cocaine can get you 20 years to life, right? So we're not going to be honest, but raise your hand if you've ever smoked weed. None of the students. Like, look at all these adults. All the adults are raising their hand, and the students are like, never drank. No, my professor's right next to me. The priest is right here, so heck no, I'm not doing that. No, okay, so, all right. So we know that a lot of people in New York smoke weed. A lot of people in Buffalo, because it's so cold you don't have nothing to do. So, all right, so this is the beginning of the war on drugs. And then you fill up the beds with so many people, and then in the 2000s, all these people, because of the Rockefeller Laws, and across from California and Arizona, Ohio, were getting out of prison in the 2000s. So there's all these empty beds. And so the Department of Corrections said, hey, how do we, how do we figure out what prisons to close and what prisons to open and how many beds and how many shoes and how many soaps and towels and pants do we need for prisoners? So the Department of Correction and the Department of Education came together and said, hey, how do we figure this out? The Department of Correction says, why don't you do standardized tests, and anybody that fails a standardized test in the 3rd grade, why don't we all do this together? Put your fingers up like 3, like this. Okay, awesome. Now put them down. All right, 3rd grade. Anybody that fails a standardized test in the 3rd grade, that's how many people, statistically, we have to be prepared that will commit a crime in 20 years. So that's how many beds we have to make in 20 years, or how many prisons we have to make. Does that make sense? So, the Department of Correction, no, it doesn't make sense, not at all. But we're going to figure out that's the rise of the new eugenics movement, which I've kind of emphasized and pushed, right? So what they did was, the Department of Correction says criminals, okay, are what if they pass a test, or if they fail a test. Criminals are what? It starts with an S. Help me out. It's an ableist term. Yeah, say it loud, okay? Criminals are, okay, most people in prison are what ethnicity? Okay, so I'm going to go back, okay? African Americans are, stupid people are, starts with a C. Criminals, okay? So now we're going to jump the S. Criminals are, okay? And then African Americans are, with the S, stupid, right? And that's what the Department of Correction and Department of Education did. Even though we don't understand, there's a little thing called oppression. Does that make sense? So we have to understand, and we'll give you a whole bunch of statistics and facts in a little bit. So I'm not going to talk to you a little bit about theory, but I'm also going to talk to you about how you have a responsibility of getting involved in eliminating the school-to-prison pipeline and getting involved in this movement that has a rise out of Ferguson. And everyone kind of knows that there's a movement going on, right, in the United States out of Ferguson. Raise your hand if you know. Okay, perfect. So we're on the same page, and now we can like get you all involved. Then you've got to ask yourself, question, why are you not involved if you're not? Here's a problem, standardized test. Here's the monkey. For every fair selection, everybody has to do the same exam. Please climb the tree, right? So this is kind of the standardized idea. Not everybody thinks the same way, so there can't be the test, perpetuating the equal and standardized test. Here's another book I did, kind of perpetuating the idea of, it's surprising, Michel Foucault. Anybody ever heard of Michel Foucault? Okay, gay theorist that died from AIDS in San Francisco during like the heyday, 1970s, 1980s. So he said, it's surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons. Which the Holocaust and the Nazis looked at Ford factories on how to construct an efficient way of creating murdering lines. Right? And so did factory farms. They looked at the Ford Foundation and the Ford Industries, and they said, hey, you all make cars like it's nobody's business. How do you do it? How do you do it so efficiently? So that's how all these industries look similar, right? So whenever there's a line in a mall, or a line in school, or a line in a grocery store, or a line at church, scratch your head and say, why is there lines? And we have to understand, whenever there's an institution that has lines, or a system that has lines, we have to challenge, because what they're trying to do in lines is make everyone the same, not everyone different and unique. So we have to challenge these ideas of creativity in our lives. So we all know that how schools and prisons are becoming very similar. I just got back from Los Angeles, UCLA and San Diego and Long Beach, and I did talks like this there, trying to help build these movements and, do different kind of shows. We did like a hip-hop activism dance. It was kind of fun, but I only had 4 hours of sleep since then and here. So we have these ideas of the school-to-prison pipeline. In Los Angeles, and like UC schools and Cal State schools, they look like prisons, right? While here, it's very open, right? Not as much. But we have to understand that high schools have a very similar idea of prison and what they look like with SROs. Who knows what an SRO is? Yes? What? No, but that's a good one. Maybe it's another SRO. Not the one I was in. Safety Resource Officer, Security Resource Officer, right? So security resource officers walking in lines, cameras, metal detectors, any of these ideas or instruments being used in any of your schools that you went to before you came to Canisius College, raise your hand. Okay, dog sniffing, lockers, those kind of things occur in predominantly schools of color, more so than white suburban schools, right? We're going to do Save the Kids in Twin Cities in Minneapolis and St. Paul have these cameras, and raise your hand if you have these cameras too. It's a camera that goes up and it's like standing like by itself, and it has a camera in the community. Do you have all of those? Like it's a police camera, right? So a lot of those cameras are off. But the idea is that it also is on for sound and a mic, and it picks up gunshots at a high octave and volume. Does anybody know that? So what we're going to do is we're going to go around these like stands, because these stands kind of like by subversive messages, they say that this area is criminal and get out of it, right? So what we're going to try to do is get these cameras out of here. And we're going to get like wooden blocks and noisemakers and start clapping them together. So they think, the cops come over and they think there's like a war going on. So we get these things out of here. We're going to keep on doing that until they get these cameras out of here so they don't surveil the poor and the communities of color. Does that make sense? And it's legal because we're just having fun, right? So we got to figure out what we can do that's fun and creative on a Friday night rather than going to a bar. We're like, we're going to go and start clapping wood together. So these are some 3 different kind of philosophies that have been kind of, I'm an educator and a criminal justice professor. And these ideas really began really good, but they kind of got, manipulated and co-opted. And so we have to come up with challenging these languages in these schools and these courses. Classroom management is a problem because it makes students numbers, and everybody here has a number. It's a student ID, right? So we have to get away from this idea of classroom management. It's not a business, right? Even though we sometimes think that on the amount of money you spend, right? So education psychology says that boy brains are over here and girl brains are over here. What about the trans brains or the queer brains or the questioning brains or the intersectional brains? Or I don't even want to think like about football and soccer and I'm a girl or I'm a boy. So it's not as simple as that socially constructed binary where women over here and men are over here. We have to challenge these socially constructed, these 2 binaries, right? So education psychology, trying to challenge that. Special ed is another form of segregation. If you're not normal, raise your hand if you're not normal. Okay, everybody should be raising your hand. There's no such thing as normal, right? Normal is this invisible, like, identity over here, which is like completely able-bodied, completely educated, white, heterosexual, Christian, wealthy, etc., right? So we have to challenge that image and say, whatever image you are, that is normal for you. And challenge that idea of normalcy. Normalcy is the philosophy of perpetuating normal. And norms are the tools that are the lines that say, is this normal or this normal? Is Christianity normal? Yes. But Muslims aren't normal and Hindus aren't normal. So we have to really understand these. This is another 3 co-opted educational reform concepts. Who's in education here? Raise your hand. Okay, so this is going to really understand for you all. Urban teaching, okay? White teachers who teach black students. That's what it became. Not at the very beginning. It was really about, anti-racism. But now that's what it's about. You have 97% of the teachers in Minnesota are white. 97% of the teachers, K to 12, public education, are white. 3% of them are everybody else, people of color. That's ridiculous, right? New York's a little bit better, right? But we still have a major problem on identity and diversity of identity when it comes to staff and teachers, right? So it doesn't reflect the student body many of the time. So then when we get into there, we start rapping. If you don't rap, don't rap. If you don't do graffiti, don't do graffiti. If you don't like country music, don't do country music. But you can respect different cultures. You just don't have to do the different cultures. That's Freedom Riders. Anybody ever saw the movie Freedom Riders? It's a really problematic movie. Right? So then we have after-school programs. If there's ever any after-school programs in your community, start putting your head up and saying, uh-oh, what's going on here? After-school programs are a band-aid on a major problem that's not being addressed. And most nonprofits are the ones to address the major problem. Us have to fix our own problems that we didn't even create in the first place. Does that make sense? So if you have a lot of nonprofits, and a whole bunch of after-school programs which are typically in the poor communities, then you understand that there's a larger problem, systematic problem going on. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever heard of the achievement gap. All these educators have heard of the achievement gap. The achievement gap is the idea that black youth and youth of color are not achieving the amount intellectually and academically as much as a white youth. Is it possible that youth of color don't want to be exploitive, perpetuate capitalism, and be on time to everything, and believe that there's something better than a test or a class? Maybe their family is sick, or maybe their father just got incarcerated, or maybe their little sister has a birthday and they've missed class. Well, they don't have values. They don't have academic values, right? And that's what we need to challenge, is that there's no gap. The gap, opportunity gap, who's ever heard of the opportunity gap? There's no such thing as the opportunity gap. The gap, throw the gap out the window, right? You're perpetuating one form of success, and that there's a multiple amounts of forms of success. And just because somebody's not doing me doesn't mean that they're lacking something, or i.e. a gap. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to inform you all and empower you all and educate you all about this major issue that's going on. So LGBT youth, we can't forget them. They're the highest per capita of kids that are being pushed out. They're also the highest percentage of kids that are being homeless. But who's pushing them out, right? Who has any idea on who's pushing these kids into homelessness? Say it real loud, anybody. Family, perfect, right? So family are the ones pushing them out. So we know about Ferguson. We know that there's problems in Ferguson. We know that the New York Times and a lot of newspapers have just came out with all the emails that are like completely racist, saying that one police officer sends it to another police officer's email on an official police department email saying that, don't worry, Obama will be out. 4 years is as long as an African American will stay to have a job. They also sent an email, a police officer to another police officer in uniform. The police department's email said that comparing chimpanzees to Michelle Obama. And the list goes on as many, many things. So how did Ferguson occur? Well, somebody doesn't believe that these individuals are human, right? Perpetuating this idea of eugenics. And people are like, nobody thinks of eugenics. Well, yeah, there is. And by proven fact, the Ferguson police, or somebody in the Ferguson police, believes in eugenics by comparing Michelle Obama to a chimpanzee. Who's ever seen these emails that went around in the last 2 years? Right, yeah. Hopefully, more of you will send them around via Facebook. It's a great tool for education. So $2.6 million on traffic stops in 2013. Typically, in a traffic stop in Ferguson, no, you won't just get a ticket or a warning. You'll get 3 to 4 tickets if you are stopped, on an average, right? So 20 to 30% of Ferguson City's revenue comes from traffic stops, which is a good amount, right? So they need to stop people. So here's some Ferguson statistics again. While only making up 67% of the population, African Americans make up 85% of the traffic stops. Not too bad, but yeah, it's a little high. It's not average, it's not equal. African Americans are twice as likely compared to white residents to be searched on a routine traffic stop. Hopefully everyone knows what a routine traffic stop is, even though they are 26% less likely to be carrying contraband compared to white students and white teachers and white people, right? And if we wanted to end the war on drugs, we would just have to target the white students and the white people in our communities, but we don't. We go after the communities of color because we don't want to end the war on drugs. We want to end people of color, like Martin Luther King said. This is not about violence and about liberation. It's about survival. It's about us being wiped off this planet, as he was saying, right? It's about being extinct, as he quoted and noted, right? So African Americans make up over 97% charged with highly discretionary offensive, described as, this is serious, as the Department of Justice Attorney General noted, manner in walking on the roadway. So if you're walking on a roadway in a suspicious way, who said that? Suspicious way, you can be arrested or ticketed, or stopped, or all the above. So, here we go. More Ferguson statistics. If you don't believe what's going on in Ferguson is a microcosm of what's going on in the United States and globally, 88% of the time when police use force, they used it on blacks. Okay, now this is like the history coming around because we know about the hoses and the dogs biting in the 1960s, 1950s, and 1970s. Dogs 15 times bit. People, all of those times were African Americans. So here's some more issues of transgendered. We always think homeless shelters are open to everybody. They're only open to men and women. If you say you're trans, they're not open to you because they don't know where to put you. Anybody identify as trans in here? Be proud. We love you all. Okay, so 1 in 3 people are being pushed away out of shelters that are trans. So we talked about the war on drugs, and that's when it occurred, and we legit soaked that in. I like visuals, so I made this visual for you. So we don't have, when some professor, some radical professor comes up to you and says, how many prisoners do we have in the United States? You're got to say what? 0. Okay, we're going to say that together. How many prisoners do we have in the United States? And I'm going to ask you that, and then you say 0. How many prisoners do we have in the United States? 0. Okay, I'm going to say that again. How many prisoners in the United States do we have?
0.
Okay, how many prisoners in Canada do we have? And you'll be able to perpetuate a statistic, right? But here in the United States, you have to say 2.5 million slaves we have because of the 13th Amendment. And everyone's kind of read that already as I'm speaking. 13th Amendment, the first section says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. So, again, we have 2.5 plus, probably close to 3 million prisoners if you look at federal and state and out of Puerto Rico and things of that sort. We have about 3 million prisoners or slaves in the United States. Right? And that's why Victoria's Secret and JanSport and all of these companies are making 20 cents to 35 cents an hour off this labor without any health care or unions or any, Christmas breaks or spring breaks, which you all have next week, right? So, anybody sagging here? On purpose? Anybody sag? Okay. Be proud of sagging. I always say it's another form of saying kiss mine. Okay, so these laws are being developed, and people will say to me, Anthony, you're going on the deep end here. Well, I got the NAACP and I got ACLU all saying, and Save the Kids all saying, that sagging, the laws that are saying that sagging should be against the law is perpetuating racial profiling. And if it wasn't about racial profiling, then we have a whole bunch of people in leggings and Uggs at all these colleges, right, being outlawed again. Because I can't really see their butts. It's kind of like, you see an indent kind of, but I can really see people's butts when they're wearing Uggs and like leggings, like on every single college campus, right? So it's not about targeting people because I can see people's butts. It has nothing to do with butts, even though you don't like to see butts. A lot of people are like, I don't want to see anybody's butt. I tell people, then don't look down. They're like, but it's right in front of me. And you're like 2 foot tall? And they're like, no, you're not 2 foot tall. So don't look down. This is an issue that is going on in Louisiana town, Florida schools, high schools. New Jersey just arrested a number of people. They typically get around a $1,000 fine or 6 months in jail for sagging. Think about if you had a V-cut and you got a $1,000 fine for having a V-cut, right? No, that's not against the law. You know why? Because it's perpetuating patriarchy and sexism. And men, specifically white men, really love to see cleavage and men love to see, tight pants on women, so that's not outlawed. But what we don't want to see is any person of color able to express themselves. And that's the reason why we have Tiana Parker, age 7. She was kicked out of school just like many, many hundreds of other young little ladies, right? And you can't have dreads in the Army recently in the last year as well, because they don't want, meaning white supremacist USA and the world, doesn't want people in African American cultures and people of color to wear their authentic hair the way they should. And that's the reason why the first African American person who was a millionaire was who? Madam T.J. Walker had products that were about bleaching your skin, straightening and, quote, relaxing your hair. It has nothing to do with relaxing your hair, right? Like, that's the worst thing that it does. It doesn't relax your hair at all. But if you look at this big, big pie of 100% of hair products for women in the United States, 85% of all those hair products that are bought by women, for women, are African Americans. Oh, well, African Americans have a lot of money. No, we know that because of poverty and racism and oppression, right? So what is going on, right? So we know that there's this idea of this thing called internalized oppression, right? And we have to really challenge that. So part of the school to prison pipeline, part of Save the Kids, is about teaching about black liberationists that are dead and alive, that they've done brilliant things like, you know, George Washington Carver with a Peanut Man. Like my kids always say, Peanut Man, Peanut Man. They don't know his name, they just know Peanut Man. He did a lot of things with peanuts, right? But a lot of other people, right, to this day are doing a lot of wonderful things like the stoplight, etc., that have been hijacked. Like the Beach Boys. Everyone knows the Beach Boys, but they don't know that the Beach Boys actually took beats and songs from African Americans and made a lot of money, while the African Americans didn't make any money off those songs. There's not one song or music or genre of music that was created in the US that wasn't from people of color. But who is owning the music industry in the United States? It's not P. Diddy. We would love to say he's making a lot of money, but he's nothing compared to Sony and Viacom, which owns BET now, right? So now there's another law, and we've got a few more slides, and we'll talk about questions and answers and holding banners and taking pictures back there. Who knows who this is? Okay, who? Okay, yes, Trayvon Martin. So Trayvon Martin created an idea of the stigma of the criminal. And the stigma of the criminal is the hoodie. Okay? And this hoodie is the reason why Oklahoma wants to have a $500 fine for anybody wearing a hoodie. Because it will eliminate crime. It's not going to eliminate crime. If you are going to rob a bank, you're going to have a hoodie on and a mask on. And the least thing that you're going to be worrying about is, I got a hoodie on, I could get in trouble. You know, you're going to have a gun and you're probably going to rob a bank for like $500,000 or $1 million or a few $1 million, and you're probably more likely to be concerned about these felonies rather than a $500 fine, right? But what we're trying to do is perpetuate the stigmatization of young youth, that they're not allowed to have hoodies. And thus, adults need to get behind this rather than saying, the problem is we have too many adults saying, well, take your hoodie off. No, they don't need to change. The system needs to change. Yeah, we need to navigate it, and we don't have to be, you know, as one might say to me, foolish, right? But they don't need to change. We need to start fighting the system that says having a steel little Arizonas and a hoodie on identifies $500 or $1,000 fine, right? So, and sagging is not the problem, right? These are just subversive ways to stigmatize and criminalize people. So we have these schools. Who ever heard of cultural competence? Okay, you can't be competent in another person's culture. So I, as a white, able-bodied man, can't be competent in what it means to be a black woman. I will never know. But it's okay to have limitations, right? But we, as teachers, love to say we're culturally competent in Latino culture, LGBT culture, and disability culture, and Hmong culture, and Somali culture. We can't be competent in another person's culture and story and narrative. So this young gentleman, 9 years old, had to stand up with other black boys on a chair like that in front of me and be auctioned off on February, which is African American History Month. And he stood on this chair, and the white kid touched his gums, looked at his teeth, felt his calves, felt his ribs, and said, $5, $6, $7, $10. And the parents had a problem with it. And the teacher said, why do you have a problem? I'm teaching about slavery. So I taught recently. I've taught a lot of different places. I taught in 2011 for a few years at SUNY Cortland. Anybody ever heard of SUNY Cortland? Right? So I taught there and had an African American. I literally, it was the most weirdest thing. I was teaching about this, in my deviant behavior class, and an African-American man, about 19, comes up to me and says, "This kind of happened to me last week." And I'm like, "You mean like kind of happened to you?" He's like, "No, I have a legal grievance right now with human resources." And I said, "Really? Like, what happened?" He says, "Well, the teacher in education at SUNY Cortland in 2011 put on music during February, like pick the cotton, and everybody in the class had to pick cotton to understand what it means to be a slave." And he walked out and said, and then he got in trouble by the dean and the professor because he didn't want to pick cotton. I'm not going to say the person's name, right? But this thing happens, and I know these things happen. And these things happen if you just do a Google search too often. So, special ed, with the support of George W. Bush in 2005, aided that if you get arrested as a youth in a juvenile detention center, not only do you get a label of being a criminal, but you have to take an IEP test. Well, across the board, which is really awesome, juvenile detention centers are trying to depopulate and make it really, really hard for kids to get incarcerated because of the point system, and I can talk to you about the point system later. But there's one thing that's funding and keeping these detention centers open all over New York and Ohio and California, the list goes on. Special ed students. They get federal funding for special ed students. So guess what? If you were a director or a superintendent of a detention center, if you have 10 kids, how many of those kids do you want to have special ed? 10. And that's a very high percentage, and there is a high percentage of kids leaving detention, not only with a criminal record, not only having an IEP, which is an individual education program, and going into special ed, but also a medication. Because they were, before they got in there, smoking weed, which is a lot less harmful. But they leave, consuming on a daily basis Ritalin and Prozac and Dexedrine and all these other things, which is ruining one's kidney, right? And I did Ritalin for maybe 6 months, 120 milligrams in college at Stephen of Austin, Texas. And I had to be rushed to the hospital because there was this big black spot and I didn't know what it was. Well, my kidney burst and there was internal bleeding. And that's what Ritalin does. It destroys one's kidney. There's that much. So then I created for the youth again, because whatever I show the youth, adults really like too. They don't like all these big numbers and statistics. They're like, I like images too. So I make images for people. So stigmatized, first IEP, segregated in special ed, then they're told not to talk back, of course, and then they're suppressed and then sentenced. Right? And there's some handouts in the back on that. I'm working on a book right now on how the school to prison pipeline and food and the environment affect individuals. So a lot of people are, if you're in the suburbs and a predominantly white community, you're eating from Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and Wegmans, organic apples and tangerines and things of that sort. Over here, you're having, high fructose corn syrup and, tater tots and Pop-Tarts and high C. Who knows that diet? Anybody know that diet? Raise your hand if you know that diet. Okay. Who knows the organic apples and, okay, so some people know that diet, okay? Well, to get this diet, it takes 6 buses, right? Because that's Trader Joe's over here, owned by a German individual. And then if you go over here, across the tracks, you got Aldi's from the same individual that owns Trader Joe's. And they're always across the tracks, or highway, or some type of, social geographical barrier, border, or boundary. So what are some effects, right? Over 3 million students received out-of-school suspension. Save the Kids in 2006 with MMEP and the Dignities in Schools is outlawing out-of-school suspension in 2006 in Minneapolis. And we want to do that while it's reformist, because we don't want any suspension, because people need to figure out what's going on. And what we're doing is we're closing down schools like in Buffalo and Chicago, right? And what we're doing is filling up the classrooms with 50, 60, 70 students with one teacher in front, supposed to manage, and then they get fired or they burn out and say, why can't they teach? Well, they're not prepared to teach, a whole, 1,000 students in 45 minutes. So here's some suspension rates, and I will send this around, but here's some really basic things that I've kind of found and did some research for you so you don't have to waste your time. 1 in 20 students that are white, 1 in 13 Native American students, which is a really big issue and where I organize in the Twin Cities because it has the largest urban refugee urban reservation called Little Earth. And we have black students who are 1 in 4, and then Latino, Latina, Chicano, which is 1 in 14. So, here's like a sequence of statistics and then we're kind of done. So, today the US is 5% of the world's population and it has 25% of the world's prisoners. Right, so some people already know this, but if you don't know this, this is kind of like, wow. And I always like to like advance this PowerPoint and like talk about new things, but I'm like, I gotta talk about the same thing over and over again, because we still don't understand that racism is alive and kicking in the United States. And it's not going to end if we don't end and challenge the economic system, the school system, and the prison industrial complex, or the criminal justice system, right? So, arrest in the United States, oh no, but most people that get arrested are black. No, they're not, right? I love when police officers come up to me and say, Anthony, you don't know, but most people that get arrested that, in the United States are black. No, they're not. They're actually very, very few. 7 million people approximately are white, 3 million are black, and the statistics go on. So we have to understand this complete flip, and then we look at African Americans now constitute nearly 1 million out of the total 2.3 million incarcerated population enslaved. African Americans are incarcerated at nearly 6 times the rate of whites. Right? Why do I have these like PowerPoint? Because if I said this and I read this, a lot of times it doesn't click, right? And I, with disabilities, I could read my whole book to you, right? But sometimes I gotta pull out things to make it really visual, and so students like visual, right? So what are some solutions? So we'll go to the solutions. So we can either lock up a youth for $123,000 a year, right? Or we can send them to Ohio State or Canisius College or something of that sort for $19,000. How much does it take to go here? $35,000, nothing, it's chump change. So, it's chump change compared to a detention center, right? 1 year, 4 years at Canisius College equals 1 year almost in a detention center for a youth. Right? This just like makes common sense. Right? So that's why I say the kids always has banners and chants and like the whole movement against the school to prison pipeline always says education, not incarceration. Right? So we'll look at segregation and try to challenge the special ed or the new eugenics and saying what we need is social justice and equity, not equality. Right? I asked my students, I gave them a whole bunch of rulers, 6-inch rulers, because they can't have 12-inch rulers because they would kill each other in a detention center. I'm like, what? Are you serious? I'm like, I can figure out how to kill somebody with a 6-inch ruler. But I said, where on this measurement is equality? And they said, I don't know. And they're like, is this a trick question? I said, not really. I just want to know where your equality is. Because if I beat one of you all, or if I give one of you all medication, equality means that everybody's getting medication, everyone's getting beaten, right? Equality is an apolitical measurement, right? What we need is equity. Equity is what you need and what you want. More so what you need rather than what you want, because we're in the United States and everybody wants everything. So let's focus on what we need. So some solutions. Here's some solutions, and I got a few more slides specifically for me and some other white people in the room, which talks about being an ally and being solidarity. And those are the last few slides. Look at peer mediation as systems in our schools and colleges, right? Nobody has to take a peer mediation or conflict transformation class. They choose to, right? So we know how to talk. I know how to talk, and I'm talking your ear off about a really serious issue. But I know how to talk. But in K-12, I've never taken a listening class. I don't know how to listen. Who's ever taken a listening class? 3 credits of listening. You taken a listening class? Okay, no 3 credits of listening. I don't think, too many universities provide a listening class. They're like, it would just be silent. They're like, no, there's active ways to listen. Smaller classrooms, which the union is working on. Eve back there, wherever she is, right there, she's in the union, she's a teacher, she's working on smaller classrooms, co-teaching models, peer education. And guess what? Hip-hop and punk and country music and whatever else those youth are really interested in, making it culturally relevant education, right? And that's what we need to focus on, is culturally relevant education. So now I get into hip-hop, right? And I'm gonna play a few songs for you. But hip-hop grew out of the Bronx. Who knows anything about hip-hop in here? Anybody hip-hop heads? Some people are hip-hop heads? Okay, cool. You gotta love hip-hop, right? Hip-hop is the tool to destroy the system that is oppressive. Chuck D said, "I am the black CNN." And that's why he was so feared, because he told the truth to so many people. KRS-One is. That's why KRS-One goes to Arizona, and he wanted to teach in an ethnic studies class, and he was banned to teach in an ethnic studies class about a month ago, right? Because he couldn't talk about ethnic issues, because they knew that hip-hop was a culture, even though our society doesn't say that hip-hop is a culture, right? So we look at different parts of hip-hop. There's 4 elements of hip-hop: DJing, breaking, MCing, and graffiti, right? There's only one that's underground, right? And you can't talk about what you do in that, which is graffiti, right? And Philadelphia, I would like to say, started that one off, right? So Tupac, everyone knows Tupac? One of the most brilliant individuals in the world, and he'll be known for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is why he was so brilliant. He said something that millions of other youth related to. And this is going back to the Department of Education, to the Department of Correction in 3rd grade. He said, "Hey, who think elementary, one day I'll see the penitentiary?" In elementary, he was thinking that a boy doesn't think that he could be a rock star, but he thought he could be, locked up. And that's the issue that's going on in this country. We have too many young people thinking that they're going to follow their uncles and their brothers and their father's footsteps rather than any other role model. And Biggie once said, you're either shooting a jump shot or slinging crack cocaine, right? And he understood that these are our 2 role models. You're going to be in the NBA, which is not realistic for many people, or you're selling drugs, which I have nothing against selling drugs, right? When you create a system like this, how do you tell a young kid that you can't get a job anywhere, you're getting pushed out, you're being targeted by the police, and if any 5 African Americans hang out on Buffalo, streets, they're going to be looked at as a gang. And then you tell them, well, you're trying to be busy and you're trying to make some money to keep the windows closed and the heat on and food in the refrigerator, and they're trying to be creative and trying to bring money in, and then you're going to stigmatize and demonize them? That's unbelievable, right? So what does Colorado do? Colorado legalizes marijuana, makes $1 million the first day in taxes on the legalization of marijuana. But guess who it goes back to? It goes back to white people. It doesn't go back to African Americans and Chicanos and Latinos. It goes back to white people, and that's where I was a few weeks ago in Durango and Denver, and I went to and took some pictures. They were like, yo, do you want to smoke some? I was like, no, I just taking pictures of seeing how white these big establishments are. Because 6 months ago, all the people that were selling on the corners were people that were of color, but now I walk into these establishments and they're all white college students selling drugs, right, legally. So now guess what African American young kids and Latino and Chicano kids have to do? They have to sell crack. Because you took their money supply away. You took their product away, and now they're selling something harder, and they're going to do longer time. So if we legalize marijuana in Minnesota or New York, we've got to make sure that whoever was selling yesterday is selling today. And that includes 15-year-olds. So yes, Biggie once said, and I think, he said it so profoundly and respectfully. This comes from what song, anybody? Yes. Yes, he said, hey, this album is dedicated to all those teachers that told me that I'll never amount to nothing. I don't know who was his teacher. I would be really, really ashamed. I'd be like moving to another country. Because now he's like, Biggie. And everyone knows Biggie, right? Like, that's not even his real name, right? So, and then he says, I never amount to nothing. And then he lives above the buildings that I was hustling in front of that called the police on me. So the number one thing Ferguson and Black Lives Movement and Save the Kids does is saying that, well, if you call the cops on another individual in your community, guarantee you 97% of the time, 98% of the time, 100% of the time, somebody's going to arrest it or shot. Okay, and that's communities of color. So So, how can we fix conflicts and crime in our communities without calling cops? Because if you do call the cops, somebody's going to jail. And if it's a domestic violence issue, both people are going to jail. Right? So we have to figure out ways to figure, different conflicts out and put in place systems, institutions, nonprofits, community centers to deal with these very violent crimes without getting police that are, only have a very limited amount of skills. And these skills have nothing to do with negotiation, conflict management, youth development. Their skills are all about escalation in an extreme case, right? And now you have in Arizona, police can become police at age 18 with a GED. I think a police officer should have like 2 PhDs and be a priest, right? That's who should be running the ethics and morals of what's going on in our society, not somebody with a GED. No offense to hierarchy and elitism of degrees, but somebody needs to have some more knowledge, right, about how to resolve conflicts in a respectful and caring way, right? So here's another idea, transformative justice. It's kind of like restorative justice, if you ever heard of that, on steroids. Because the difference between restorative justice and transformative justice, restorative justice doesn't look at identity politics, and identity politics like class, race, gender, poverty issues. So that's what we need to focus on. So if in 2005, some young people stole from Walmart during Katrina in New Orleans, well, they are the criminals. And Walmart isn't the criminals. Well, Walmart we know is criminals for a variety of other reasons because they're pushing out mom and pop shops, right? So we can't just say victims are over here and offenders are over here. We are victims and offenders at the same time, right? Just because you are oppressed one minute, because you're a black man, right, because of your race, doesn't mean that you are always going to be oppressed. You could be oppressing a black woman, right, or a person that is black that's a woman of color. Right? So we have to look at these things. I'm a person that's in the LGBTQ community and a person with disabilities, but I'm a white able-bodied man too, right? With an education. So I have to understand these things are very intersectional and complex, which transformative justice argues for. And here's some ideas which I'll kind of go over really quick. So challenging oppression, responsibility, voluntarily going and talking to people that you've harmed and hurt. Don't talk about crime and offended and victim. That's language of the criminal justice system. Get away from that language. Talk about hurt. Talk about healing. Talk about accountability. Talk about transforming, being holistic, right? We don't resolve conflicts, right? I want to know a woman or a person that's been abused by their father that has resolved their conflicts. It's not resolved, they're transforming, never ending, right? And they're repetitively working those things out. So strategies. Who's ever gone to a rally in here? Rally, protest, dying, sit in? Awesome. Who's ever been arrested in here? All right, be proud of it. The greatest people on this planet have all been arrested. Specifically, somebody's been murdered, and you all are going to an institution for one of the greatest peacemakers in our history, right? And I just found out today from Nancy, he had disability, so we gotta give Jesus some disability respect too, right? So rallies, protests, and social media, community circles, transformative justice, dialogues like this. Before you leave today, make sure you get somebody's number, contact. Take pictures of each other here. Take pictures of the banner, which we're going to do. Hashtag it. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Hashtag no youth in prison. Hashtag all over. Why hashtag? What is a hashtag? Okay, a hashtag is a way to organize and categorize via the internet. So if I want to find somebody, I just go hashtag, and then I can find all the issues that are dealing with that particular issue all over the world. So I have some other organizations and other things going on. I just got back from Youth Justice Coalition in Los Angeles. I don't know anybody that likes hip hop, but that is the coolest center in the world. He's got graffiti everywhere. This guy, he's one of the peace builders in there. He was checking in everybody, he had tattoos all over his face. And he was the nicest guy. He gives me a big hug before he even knew me. He's like, hey, what's up? And he's like, hey. And he's like, how can we help you today? I'm like, you just give hugs? And he's like, yeah. And so he had a really rough background. And now he's, transforming and doing hip hop and graffiti, and they were doing stenciling on the floor. They were talking about Assata Shakur in their classes. And they were talking about Fred Hampton in their classes. In middle school classes, they're talking about reading Assata Shakur biography, Angela Davis. That's what we need to start learning about and educating about. But something happened in 1960 to 1980. We don't learn that history because that was the history where we fought back. That was the history where it got scary for white people, right? We don't want to talk about that history. We want to like keep that out of the history book. It's like Martin Luther King to Obama. You know, it's like everything else, let's not talk about. So then we have the National Week of Action for Youth Justice, and then we have the National Week of Push Out, which is the beginning of the school semester. May 17th, anybody, come on, let's get some educated people here. May 17th, what happened on that day in civil rights movements? Anybody? Brown versus Board of Education. Martin Luther King had a lot to do with that. And then on May 19th, somebody was born that was very significant. I talked about it a million times. Good? Malcolm X, great. Malcolm X was born. So the National Week Against Incarceration starts May 17th and ends May 23rd. Save the Kids and a whole bunch of other organizations are going to be doing things in Buffalo. Die-ins, teach-ins, graffiti, hip-hop, teach-ins like this. Hopefully you all get involved. So, Black Lives Matter. I just had my hearing. I got arrested in the Mall of America with a number of other people because I wouldn't leave and the cops were like pushing me and I pushed back and et cetera, right? So, but we have to understand, we have to use our privilege, we have to use our education and put it into place. If we don't, we're just going to be talking, and talk is really cheap, right? Maybe not at colleges. But these are the things that this organization, as well as this movement, wants to do. No more prisons, no more cops, and no more punitive justice. Well, if we don't have cops, we're going to kill people. No, if we don't have cops, we'll have a respectful community. That's the only way we're going to get to a place with no prisons and no cops. If we start respecting each other. If we don't respect each other, we're always going to have a system based on police, punitive justice, and prisons. Right? These are the three worst P's in our community right now, which we have to get them out. But we don't know any other alternative. We don't even know how to respect one another in our own community, our own department, our own degree, right? How many people have gotten in a conflict today with somebody? Anybody? Okay. How many people got into conflicts with somebody in the last week? Okay. But we don't take classes on how to deal with these things. Who's ever gotten a major argument with their family? All right. Who doesn't talk to anybody in their family? There's like one or two people they don't talk to. Anybody doesn't talk to some people in their family? Okay. All right. Who's ever seen violence in their community? Who's ever seen violence in their household? Yeah. So we just never taught how to heal, respect, and care for each other. You know, Che Guevara once said, a true revolutionary is a revolutionary that loves. And we don't teach it enough, right? We need to teach how to love somebody. It's not about jealousy, right? It's not about, like, you know, ego. It's about doing something for somebody when you don't have any more time, that one more extra step. When you think you're completely exhausted, when you think you can't do any more, that's when you do, you know, a little bit more because you love that other individual, right? I love animals, but I don't want too many animals in my house. I'm vegan, I'm an animal liberationist, right? But I know that how animals are treated is wrong, right? Because I love that species. And if you take that species off this planet, all non-human animals off this planet will fall apart. You take humans off this planet, right? The world gets better. It's like a really kind of goofy thing, right? So why is that? So we need to start loving even species and other people we don't even understand or we don't even hang out with. And that's a really difficult conversation to have. Hopefully that's a conversation you'll have in your classrooms and your clubs rather than just doing fundraisers and, you know, whatever else you got to get prepared for in life, okay? Because I think that's the ultimate essence of life in itself, is to find one thing that you can truly love, right? Martin Luther King said, you're not fit to live if you don't have nothing to die for, right? So I think I'll end with Martin Luther King's quote. He said it best, I didn't. So thank you so much, and we'll have some Q&A right now. Thank you so much. So, nobody leave. Okay, so the priest can leave. I'm not going to challenge the priest. The priest can do whatever he wants. All right. So there's a hand here. I'm going to pass the mic to you.
So here in Buffalo, very recently, one of the responses to kids being on the street during the day is the proposal of a civil curfew, a daytime curfew. Many of the proponents of that are in the African American community. I was wondering if you could talk about the response, right? Which, I mean, so part of the problem is then it increases police contact with young people on the street during the day. But could you talk about ways to kind of combat that and to answer a call, which is essentially for sort of police response to, what is it, truancy? Yeah.
Truancy's all over the place. Why we use this mic to be inclusive, because some people might, not be able to hear that well, right? So truancy, how do you address it? Well, on a systematic way, academic theorist, I would say, we need to look at what's going on in the class and why they don't want to be in the class in the first place. But that doesn't address the issue that's going on right here, right? So then you get the hip hop, right? And the hip hop is like, let's be covert. We got to tell these kids where not to hang out and where to hang out, because they will be targeted. So we need to find, one might say, illegal spaces for them to hang out if they don't want to be in school and being taught that they're slaves 24 and that's the only thing they want to be educated about. And a lot of black liberationists are actually arguing that we need charter schools because public schools aren't doing it, and so we need to have black liberation and black consciousness charter schools as like a band-aid on the public education systems to give them some self-worth, right? So that's kind of a mixture of a few things that we can do, and I'm not saying charter schools are the answer, but a lot of people are doing that because public schools, they need to do something now, and that's kind of the answer to a lot of people that I'm hearing from charter school movement. It's like, we need to do something now for these kids because they're taught how to hate themselves and how to hate their face and how to hate their hair and how to hate their clothes and et cetera, et cetera. So I totally understand where they're going with that, but we also need to find illegal kind of community centers or homeschooling for these kids so they don't get in trouble in a very liberating, expressive manner. That's all, that's what I say to a lot of people. I mean, it's advocating for dropping out, but sometimes I would rather drop out than having a young kid, being told they're nothing over and over again. Yes?
So one thing I think about a lot is that when I was growing up, I went to schools that were mostly black a lot of the time, and I actually felt afraid because I was often picked on, and I thought that black people hated me and that they were all mean, and I almost kind of had a racist mentality because of my personal experience. And in my teens, I finally broke into being able to hang out with black people and go into their houses and see what their lives were like and start to understand how their upbringing was different from my upbringing. They're very loud, very expressive, they listen to different music, watch different things on television, play different video games, eat different foods, and I had to learn to speak the way they spoke. And I had to be careful not to say certain words because I found out those aren't allowed for white people. And then when I finally got to the point where I was an adult and I hung out with white people, and I never see black people anymore. They don't go to the same events I go to. They're never there. And I don't understand how to bring the two together. I meet a lot of white people they've never been to a black person's party. They've never been to a black person's house. They don't understand when they walk by why these people are acting so different. They're like, why are they so loud? Why are they so crazy? Why do they have to act like that? And I'm like, actually, they're kind of cool if you get to know them. But, there's not an intermingling. So, how can we have events that are cool for people of different backgrounds to actually get to know each other? Because I feel like a lot of the racism comes from just not understanding each other, different ways of behaving. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think you said it well. I don't have anything to add. I think we just need to create more spaces like that. But the systems, the white supremacist systems, which I created an equation, white supremacy plus white domination equals white privilege, right? We talk about the privilege. Privilege is not the important thing. It's how it got in your head in the first place and how it's being perpetuated through white domination. And I think through that equation, very simple equation, I like to keep it simple, because I work with a lot of youth. So in that, we just need to figure out how to respect different cultures and learn about different cultures, right? I have a friend who's the co-national director of Save the Kids, and what he does is goes around to a lot of schools and colleges and speaks around how hip-hop should replace the U.S. History books. And he just wants, rather than Thanksgiving, he wants Dilla Day. And like rather than Christmas, he wants Tupac, to be celebrated. And rather than Easter, he wants Biggie to be celebrated. So he wants a lot more cultures to be challenged and worked in. So this doesn't have to apply to you, but to be somebody, and this is kind of a working kind of bullet points, but be invited to the struggle, not a movement. A struggle is where somebody can't leave, right? A movement is typically organized and directed and led by people of privilege, right? And they can move like this, but a struggle looks a lot different. Start listening, articulate one's commitment. If you're not going to be able to do 8 hours a week on Facebook, or just say it, but don't make up lies and say you're going to do something and you can't do it. Be willing to be challenged and be called out. Be willing to learn new processes and cultural practices, like you were kind of saying, right? Explain one's skills. Challenge and focus on tokenizing. Be willing to leave and not be blaming others. So if somebody tells me, which I always am, and which is fine, as a white person, a white male, like, Anthony, it's time for you to leave the room. And they're like, but I got a PhD, I wrote all these books, I just presented at Canisius College on racism, right? Like, but I can't be like pushed out of this because you all don't know as much as I do. No, you just need to leave. Without even arguing and justifying why you need to leave, just say, you gotta go now. And I think it's really hard for people in dominant roles to say, I just will leave and not blame them or show them like that they're missing something, right? So, explain your motives and personal goals. I think you need to put that out there. Why are you here? Well, I want a nonprofit job and I want to help out black young kids, right? Why? Because I love their hair, right? They're just so cute. I love mixed babies. They're just like the cutest. And I might, just adopt one from like, Africa. And these are real, true things. I never dated a black man. Like, and then you perpetuate this exoticism, right? And we need to understand how these things are played out and to put that stuff out there when you don't feel comfortable in talking about it, right? So be willing to follow and never lead. Be willing to take accountability and responsibility about your supremacy, right? So those are some like ideas that I would kind of add as you brought that up. I wasn't going to bring it up. Didn't want to speak about that. Not that I'm against anti-racism. Any other quick questions? I know before you all are taken off, if you can take a picture, there's a sign that says no youth in prison, hashtag. You take a picture of yourself with that, that'd be great. We'll see if you do it. I'm going to call you out. So, and then we got a banner here, so we'll take one or two more questions we'll take here, and then we'll organize. And then we've got a whole bunch of organizations in this space right now that have some amazing announcements that need to be heard by you all. So you've got 5 more minutes to create a world a better place. So there's a hand right here. You'll be the last.
I was hoping you might say something about, we talk a lot about black men of color, and incarceration rates, but more recently, women of color are the largest growing population of those incarcerated. I'd like to hear you say a little bit about this gender bias, for lack of a better description, and how we talk about it.
For sure. So I get pushed into that a lot, just because that's been the cycle and that's the largest population, right? I would love to talk about LGBT issues and disability issues, but that's not the largest group. But I think it's growing, and the reason it's growing is because women are fighting back in domestic issues. And that's why, in my opinion, it's not always healthy to call the cops if you're a person of color, because it ends up for that woman getting arrested because they stab back the male that is beating them, et cetera, right? And alcohol does play a role in domestic violence, right? So I would say Poetry Behind the Walls, the book that Save the Kids puts out, began in 2009 because of a young African American girl. And I asked her to write her poetry about her family. Oh gosh, was I naive, right? She writes a poem about how her father had sex with her and then sold her into a group of men where her friends had sex with her at the same time in the family room. And she wrote about this, and I said, I'm so sorry. She says, no, this is great, I got it out finally. Nobody in the detention center is allowing me to speak about this. And I said, wow. So I think listening to these stories, having these stories more, the National Week of Action Against Incarcerating Youth on Thursday, May 23rd, 2nd, or 1st, is Girls Matter. So that day is specifically dedicated to girls because Project NIA, ACLU, Save the Kids, a lot of other organizations are focusing on sex trafficking and fighting back in domestic violence, as well as Insight, which is an organization organized by women of color. They actually have on their website self-defense classes and like how to organize self-defense classes. So, which I have nothing against. Sometimes I need to be punched. So, we have this privilege, and it's like, wake up, you're doing something wrong, and sometimes white people don't want to hear that they did something wrong. And if white people don't feel comfortable in hearing that they've done something wrong, they should get out of the movement and work on themselves some more. Because the whole point of being in a movement and a struggle is to be challenged, just like education in your classroom. It's like, I don't like this teacher. She's telling me to change. I'm like, yeah, you should. So there's the last question, comment to add to.
Yeah, I had a question on taking away like police and surveillance off of schools. Like I went to a high school where we would have fights, riots, shootings, and stuff like that annually, and police and security there were the only ones to stop that. Is there like any other societies or cities around the world that actually don't have police officers and they're able to live in harmony, or is that just like a hypothetical situation that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think there's, police are not a long time career that's always existed in human history. Like, if you look in Aboriginal histories, they actually started restorative justice, but then white people kind of termed it. But, if you look at Africa, you look at Aboriginal, First People, First Nations, Native Americans, they didn't have cops, right? It's when you introduce a very competitive culture that is based on exploitation and greed, that's when you need somebody to protect what you have and what they don't have. And to keep that in, that balance or that unbalanced equation out. So I think that's what we have to start looking at. And how do we get in conflicts in the first place? We put too many people in a school. So we need to start getting these students out. You got 4,000 students in a room like this. It's going to cause some conflict because I don't want to smell your BO, or I don't want to be touching your butt in the shower, or oh, you looked at me funny, or you're dating my girlfriend, and there's just too many people going on, and there's not enough organizations and classes talking about how to resolve these conflicts. So I think that would be one thing, and then looking at other cultures, right? Like, we don't know how to solve problems because we are given this, but we don't know about everything else around us, right? Hip hop might look violent, but they narrate violence, what's in their community, but they battle it out. They breakdance, they graffiti, they DJ, they rap it out, but they don't actually hit each other. And that's the true essence of real conflict transformation in hip hop. It's all about battling in a nonviolent way. And I think you could go up to a bunch of youth that are about to fight and be like, why don't you battle it? And you promoted that, they would, and they would be talking about each other's moms, and everyone would be laughing, and everyone would be dissing each other, and be like, your mom's so blah, blah, blah. But at least they're articulating themselves in a way, I mean, it's not ideal, and it's sexist, and it's patriarchal, don't get me wrong, but they're at least getting away from violence, and they can do the dozens in another way that's not perpetuating some type of ism, if that makes sense. But we have to introduce that stuff. I don't have a model of a school that's doing that always, but I would say Youth Justice Coalition is one of them, and there's a variety of other schools that are actually doing that as well too. Any other quick questions, comments? We're going to get up here and take some pictures. We're going to make sure everyone signs up. But before you leave, before we do all these things, there's a few organizations, raise your hand, that want to make some quick announcements. And this is about organizing. So I'm not going to be lecturing and out of here. So there's one, Eve, and then Citizens.
I feel left
I don't really like and forgive me holding this phone. I belong to the group, Buffalo Anti-Racism Coalition. And you can't hear me? And another group that Anthony mentioned, Buffalo Save the Kids. And we will be hosting a discussion on Wednesday, March 25th at 6 p.m. in the Gallagher Center multi-purpose room at Niagara University. There will be a showing of the film Fire in the Heartland, which is about an incident of student protest at Kent State, Ohio, in which some of the students were killed by the National Guard. And one of the men that was injured, it was a child at the time, that was injured by the National Guard will be coming to speak, and we'll be talking about student activism. I'm sure we'll talk about Ferguson, rebellion, resistance, so please come out. It's also kind of the rebirth of the Black Student Union at Niagara University, which is great, so if you could make it out to support them, that would be wonderful. Oh, and Lou De Jesus.
We can actually take a picture. You got 2 more minutes, I understand. You all gotta run. Hold out. We'll take a picture.
Hi, I'm Eve Shippens, and I'm a Buffalo teacher, and I'm actually going to, announce many things that we're doing. As a member of the Buffalo Parent Teacher Organization, on Saturday, March 28th, at the Meriwether Library at 2 p.m., we're having a New York State Common Core Curriculum and High-Stakes Standardized Testing Forum, Facts versus Myths, because we want to encourage refusing the New York State testing. Also, on Thursday, March 26th, we are going to have a Protect Our Schools statewide demonstration rally at Bennett High School at 4:30 p.m. till just 5 o'clock. And we really want to get as many people out as possible and as diverse of a community to show the state how important schools are for our young people. Got one more.
One more.
And as a member of Citizen Action, I just want to promote on March 17th at 11 a.m. at the Erie County Holding Center, Citizen Action will be having a press conference on Raise the Age New York. So if you're interested, please come out.
Hi, I'm Vicki Ross. I do peaceful conflict resolution for the Western New York Peace Center and the Interfaith Peace Network. And I just wanted to mention on the 16th, at this coming Monday, we're going to have a vigil at 4 o'clock at Bidwell and Elmwood for victims of violence and people who've stood up to violence and been killed for it. So if you have anything you want to read or any hip hop or anything you want to do, we're going to be sharing it in that space. That's one thing. And then the other thing I just mentioned is that we do regularly go out and protest the drones. So the unmanned aerial vehicles that are, in the skies that are doing war crimes overseas are coming back to roost here. The FAA is figuring out how to put them in our domestic airspace over this. They're supposed to come up with that plan this year. So Niagara Falls Air Base has been assigned that mission, and we do go out there. I would just say, maybe the easiest thing is to say, if you want to get some of we go out the 2nd and 4th Thursday of the month. So if you want to talk about that and carpool out there, just see me afterwards. Thanks.
No drones, Niagara?
And it's no drones Niagara.
And these individuals right here, as well as Nancy and a whole bunch of other people, put this whole thing together. So if you all can stand up, both of you all. Thank you so much. Nancy's back there, video. So I'm assuming that you'll talk a little bit about your organization again, but thank you so much for everyone coming out. Before you take off, you're gonna take a picture. So we got one, you don't wanna talk? Okay, you talk. Before you take off, take a picture, so.
Okay, so again, thank you all for coming out tonight. Again, this is an event sponsored by USA's Diversity Board. A big thank you again to Asher for putting this together. She did a really good job. She's the brains, I'm the muscle for the organization, really. And thank you again to Dr. Nocella for an excellent talk. Very lively, very informative, thank you. I've learned a lot. For all of you that came tonight, we would love to get a picture up here holding this banner. So if you're more than happy to come on up and we'll get a picture. Get in on this. It's now or never. I'm sorry, I'm terrible. Don't be shy, don't be shy. Show your support. Be an ally. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I know. What's up with that?
Yeah. There we go.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Raise your fist. These traditions stand forever. Thank you. Thank you, brother. You got the pictures up there.